Stephen Gilmore quickly became a fan favorite amongst Detroit Lions fans after his fantastic 2023 preseason. Many people believe that not only did Stephen Gilmore deserve to make the 53-man roster, but after the subpar cornerback play over the first couple of months, there were people claiming that Stephen Gilmore deserved a chance at the starting boundary cornerback position. However, after an offseason of upgrades and an offseason of bringing in so many defensive backs, does Stephen Gilmore, the fan favorite cornerback, even have a place on this roster going into 2024? That is exactly what we are going to be taking a look at today, starting off with Stephen Gilmore as a prospect and how he made the roster in 2023. Now, Stephen Gilmore stands at 5'8", 174 pounds, and was an undrafted rookie free agent from Marshall in the 2023 offseason after, of course, he was failed to be selected throughout the draft process. Now, as a prospect, Stephen Gilmore had a 6.26 RAS score, grading out with very poor size in the 1 percentile for DBs in the NFL, but graded out with good explosiveness, great speed, but did not have any agility testing to his name. The 5-year player at Marshall was named a second-team All-Sun Belt in the 2022 season, the second-team All-CUSA team in the 2021 season, as well as a first-team CUSA defensive back in 2020. The decorated cornerback played, of course, 5 years with Marshall. In his freshman year, put up 12 games, 17 tackles, a tackle for loss, and 1 pass defended. Was not a major part of the Thundering Herd defense, but certainly had his impact on special teams and a little bit on the defense. As a sophomore, Stephen Gilmore played in 13 games where he had 50 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 2 interceptions, 4 passes defended, and a forced fumble. A sizable step up at the cornerback position, playing a lot more snaps at Marshall with a lot more impact on the defensive side of the ball. And that impact continued into his junior season where he had 39 tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, an interception, 12 passes defended, and 2 forced fumbles. And then he followed it up with another junior season where he had 53 tackles, a tackle and a half for loss, 1 sack, 3 interceptions, and 8 passes defended, and then finished up his career as a senior with 41 tackles, 0.5 tackles for loss, 3 more interceptions, 1 of those being for a touchdown, while having 10 passes defended, meaning in his career at Marshall, Stephen Gilmore totaled over 200 tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, 9 interceptions, 1 pick six, 35 passes defended, as well as 3 forced fumbles. However, despite having a very decorated and very successful collegiate career at Marshall, as well as being the younger brother to NFL All-Pro and former Defensive Player of the Year Stephen Gilmore, Stephen Gilmore went undrafted in 2023 and signed with the Detroit Lions in the preseason. Now, throughout the preseason, Stephen Gilmore was phenomenal, having 3 games under his belt with 10 tackles, 2 passes defended, 2 interceptions, and a pick six to his name. Many people believe that Stephen Gilmore was a lock for the 53-man roster after being arguably the team's most impressive defensive back through the 3 games. Not only did Stephen Gilmore make the 53-man roster, but some people believe that throughout the season, Stephen Gilmore deserved a chance to play on the boundary after Jerry Jacobs and Kendall Vilder and Khalil Dorsey all struggled throughout the season. Many people believe that the undrafted rookie free agent deserved a chance to show what he could do. Now, in 2023, Stephen Gilmore played in 3 games for the Detroit Lions, and while he didn't have a major impact, he did play 12 special team snaps and 2 snaps on the defensive side of the ball, however, did not record a single tackle in any of those 14 snaps. Now, going into 2024, the Detroit Lions made a lot of changes to their roster. They added a lot of cornerbacks, and the cornerback depth chart is very, very solid at this point. There's a lot of talent, a lot of depth, and a lot of competition for Stephen Gilmore to work through. Of course, at the top, you have Carlton Davis and Terrion Arnold. You have Ennis Rakestraw, the 2nd-round pick. You have Amik Robertson, the prized free agent. You have Emmanuel Mosley, the free agent for a season to go that everybody still thinks of very, very highly in that organization. You have Khalil Dorsey, a great special teams player. Kendall Vilder, a starting cornerback from last year. Maurice Norris, a standout undrafted rookie free agent from this year. And then, of course, you have Stephen Gilmore at the bottom of that depth chart. Now, this is not necessarily the depth chart that the Lions have put out. These are just simply the names that are on the cornerback depth chart as of now. This is not an accurate ranking of where they lie in the depth chart currently. However, taking a look at the players that Stephen Gilmore is likely not going to make the roster over, obviously he's not going to make it over Carlton Davis, Ennis Rakestraw, Terrion Arnold, Robertson, or Mosley. Those 5 guys are going to make the roster when they are healthy, and they are players that will be impactful and will be trusted to play the boundary cornerback position when called upon. That means likely the last cornerback position falls in between Khalil Dorsey, Kendall Vilder, Maurice Norris, and Stephen Gilmore. Now, in comparison to those players, I do think that Stephen Gilmore makes this roster. I think comparing him to the players that are potentially going to play over him, I think Gilmore versus Norris goes pretty cleanly to Stephen Gilmore, a player with a little bit more experience, the ability to play on the boundary, a guy that has been better for you in the past in the preseason. And unless Maurice Norris goes out and has a phenomenal training camp and a great preseason, much like Gilmore did a season ago, I think it's going to be really hard for Norris to kind of overtake and take that step in front of Stephen Gilmore. And I do think that despite Norris being a really talented young player and likely being a player the Lions are targeting for their practice squad, I just don't think he's going to make it on the active roster over a player like Stephen Gilmore, especially if Gilmore continues his standout preseasons like he did last year. Now, when it comes between Stephen Gilmore and Kendall Vilder, I again lean towards Stephen Gilmore. And I know that last year Kendall Vilder started for the Detroit Lions. I know that he was a starting boundary corner and actively started over Stephen Gilmore, who was also on the roster. But I think that situations are a little bit different this time around. Kendall Vilder was called upon to be a starter last season because he was the best in a bad situation. He was a veteran cornerback who had been in the NFL for 5 years, who had covered number 1 wide receivers before, and had the ability to potentially learn the playbook a little quicker, and of course, having the starting experience to play on a starting defense, whereas you would not want to throw out a rookie undrafted cornerback who has never played a snap against guys like Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb and the best receivers in the game. However, as a cornerback 5 and 6, Kendall Vilder looks a lot less enticing at that aspect. You're paying him more money as a veteran minimum. You obviously don't need Stephen Gilmore to play as your cornerback 6, and you're not going to be calling on him for that purpose, right? Yes, if there are 6 cornerback injuries and you get down to the point where it's Stephen Gilmore or potentially signing Vilder back to the active roster, then maybe you go back to Kendall Vilder, but you're not going to develop Kendall Vilder into what he already is not, right? He is 6 years into his NFL career. We know what kind of player Kendall Vilder is going to be and what kind of player that he is, whereas Stephen Gilmore has a learning curve. Stephen Gilmore has a trajectory for progression. And if you're talking about a 6th cornerback, you want the guy that's going to grow. You want the guy that's going to be better. You want the player that's going to improve on your roster in the long term when he's not playing, as opposed to a player that's not going to improve, but also likely still will never play. So from that aspect, I do think that Gilmore makes the roster over Vilder because he has that chance to develop and become a better player than Vilder will in the long run. Now, when it comes to Gilmore versus Mosley, I think that Mosley will make the roster over Stephen Gilmore. However, just due to the timeline of his ACL tear and ACL surgery / recovery, I don't think that Mosley will be healthy for the preseason or the first couple of weeks of NFL play. I think it's more likely that he gets put on the physically unable to perform list for at least the first month of the NFL season, meaning that that spot is open for Stephen Gilmore, but it will not be open for the entirety of the season. So I think coming week 1, you might see Stephen Gilmore make the active roster, but as the weeks go through and as Mosley gets a little more healthy, you will see Stephen Gilmore take that step back down the roster ladder as Mosley slots himself back into the secondary. And I think the same thing goes for Khalil Dorsey. I don't know the exact injury when it does come to Khalil Dorsey, but I do think that when he is healthy, he will make the roster over Stephen Gilmore. I think that Khalil Dorsey brings a lot more to the special teams as a special teams ace than Stephen Gilmore ever will. And I think that if Dorsey is healthy, he will get the nod over Gilmore in this defense. But again, due to the injury that was suffered during minicamp, I don't know the timeline to Khalil Dorsey's return. I'm not sure if Khalil Dorsey will be ready for the preseason, if he will be ready for the regular season, if he's going to take a couple of weeks to get ready into that regular season. It is very unclear as to what will happen. But I think that until Khalil Dorsey is good to go, I think until he is fully healthy, Stephen Gilmore will slot in on the active roster, will suit up, and will contribute on the special teams, meaning that likely and potentially the week 1 roster due to injuries could be Carlton Davis and Terrion Arnold on the boundary, with Ennis Rakestraw and Amik Robertson as your cornerbacks 3 and 4, with Stephen Gilmore likely being the cornerback 5, with Mosley and Dorsey not available due to injury. So I do think while that is the case, I think that when Mosley comes back, he will potentially be the cornerback 5, right? As that comes out, right? He will start at cornerback 5. When Dorsey comes out, when Mosley comes back, he will slot in as cornerback 5, moving Gilmore to cornerback 6. And when Dorsey comes back, it will officially move him to cornerback 7, likely being waived and potentially being put back on the practice squad. Now, I do think that Stephen Gilmore is a very strong football player. I do think he's a very talented defensive back. And I do think he's a player that the Lions do want to keep around for the long term. But with all the additions that were made to this roster, Stephen Gilmore just simply might not have a place on it anymore if the secondary is fully healthy. But I do think he will always have a spot on the practice squad in case of injuries do arise. So with all of that being said, that is my breakdown of Stephen Gilmore, a player that I think is extremely talented, a player that I think is going to be very exciting to see throughout the preseason and potentially will make the roster come week 1. But I think a player that's fighting a very uphill battle, and a battle that he will have to win without a doubt if he wants a chance to make the active roster for the season. With all of that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Let me know your opinions on Stephen Gilmore and whether or not you think he will make the active roster come week 1, as well as how long you think he will stay on the active roster once injuries become less of a factor. I'd be very curious what you guys have to say and what you guys think. With all of that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions.